The three gang members had been watching the old lady for weeks. Every Tuesday at 3 p.m., she'd walk out of First National Bank on Maple Street with her little purse clutched tight, head down, moving slow, like she had all the time in the world. Perfect target, they figured. What could some 72-year-old grandmother possibly do against three young guys with knives? What they didn't know was that Dorothy Henderson had spent 12 years in the Army as a sniper, with 47 confirmed kills in Iraq and Afghanistan. And today, these punks were about to learn why you should never judge a book by its cover. Welcome to Real Stories. Before we dive into this incredible tale of hidden skills and street justice, drop a comment telling us which city you're watching from today. And if you believe stories like this deserve to be heard, smash that subscribe button and help us honor the quiet warriors living among us.
Downtown Millerville wasn't exactly the rough part of town, but it wasn't Beverly Hills either. The small Ohio city had seen better days since the factory closures in the 90s, and crime had been creeping into areas that used to be safe for families. Dot Henderson lived alone in a two-story house 3 blocks from the bank, the same house she'd bought with her late husband Earl back in '85. At 72, she was what most folks would call a typical grandmother. Gray hair always in a neat bun, cardigans from JCPenney, sensible shoes for her daily walks. She volunteered at the animal shelter on weekends, brought cookies to church bake sales, and always had a smile for the neighbors. But what the neighbors didn't know was that Dot had enlisted in the Army at 18, back when women weren't supposed to be anywhere near combat. She'd worked her way up through sheer determination and an unusual talent. She could put a bullet exactly where she wanted it, from distances that made grown men nervous. "Best damn sniper I ever worked with," her old commanding officer used to say. "Doesn't matter if it's 200 yards or 800. If Dot's got you in her sights, you better start praying." Dot had kept that part of her life private since coming home. Earl knew, of course, but he'd passed 2 years ago from cancer. Now it was just her living quietly, trying to enjoy her golden years in peace.
Downtown Millerville wasn't exactly the rough part of town, but it wasn't Beverly Hills either. The small Ohio city had seen better days since the factory closures in the 90s, and crime had been creeping into areas that used to be safe for families. Dot Henderson lived alone in a 2-story house 3 blocks from the bank, the same house she'd bought with her late husband Earl back in '85. At 72, she was what most folks would call a typical grandmother. Gray hair, always in a neat bun, cardigans from JCPenney, sensible shoes for her daily walks. She volunteered at the animal shelter on weekends, brought cookies to church bake sales, and always had a smile for the neighbors. But what the neighbors didn't know was that Dot had enlisted in the Army at 18, back when women weren't supposed to be anywhere near combat. She'd worked her way up through sheer determination and an unusual talent. She could put a bullet exactly where she wanted it from distances that made grown men nervous. "Best damn sniper I ever worked with," her old commanding officer used to say. "Doesn't matter if it's 200 yards or 800. If Dot's got you in her sights, you better start praying." Dot had kept that part of her life private since coming home. Earl knew, of course, but he'd passed 2 years ago from cancer. Now it was just her, living quietly, trying to enjoy her golden years in peace. Marcus Johnson, 19, thought he was running the smartest crew in Millerville. Along with his boys Tony and Deshaun, both 20, they'd been pulling small-time jobs around town for months. Nothing too crazy, purse snatchings, car break-ins, maybe a convenience store if they were feeling bold. "Check it out," Marcus said, nodding toward the bank as Dot emerged with her weekly cash withdrawal. Same time, same routine. Old Bird's probably got her whole Social Security check in that purse. Tony, thin as a rail with tattoos covering his neck, laughed. "Man, my grandmother's faster than that lady. This gonna be like taking candy from a baby." Deshaun wasn't so sure. Something about the way the old woman carried herself bothered him, but he couldn't put his finger on what. "I don't know, guys, maybe we should stick to the college kids. They got better phones anyway." "You going soft on us?" Marcus shot back. "She's probably got $200-300 in there. Easy money. And what's she gonna do? Beat us with her purse?" They'd been following her routine for 3 weeks now. Every Tuesday, Dot would walk to the bank, make her withdrawal, then take the long way home through Riverside Park. That's where they'd make their move. Nice and isolated, plenty of escape routes if anyone came looking. What they didn't realize was that Dot had spotted them on day 2.
Old habits die hard, and 12 years of staying alive in war zones had taught Dot to notice when she was being watched. The 3 young men weren't exactly subtle about it, hanging around the same street corner, trying too hard to look casual, always checking their phones when she walked by. Amateurs, she muttered to herself, as she folded her bank receipt and slipped it into her purse. Back in Iraq, insurgents who telegraphed their intentions that badly usually ended up dead within the week. Dot had been hoping they'd lose interest and move on to easier targets. But after 3 weeks of surveillance, it was clear these boys were committed to making her their mark. She'd have to handle this herself. That evening, Dot went up to her bedroom and opened the locked closet that hadn't been touched since Earl's funeral. Behind the winter coats and boxes of Christmas decorations was a military-grade gun safe that most people would need heavy equipment to crack. Inside, carefully maintained and cleaned, was her old M24 sniper weapon system. The same rifle she'd carried through 2 deployments, the same one that had kept her alive and protected her fellow soldiers for over a decade. "Well, old friend," she said, running her fingers along the familiar stock, "looks like we might have some work to do." Dot wasn't planning to hurt anyone if she could help it, but if these punks wanted to test her, she'd give them an education they'd never forget. The next Tuesday came gray and drizzly, the kind of October weather that made most people want to stay indoors. But Dot followed her routine exactly, walked to the bank, made her withdrawal, and headed toward Riverside Park with her purse tucked under her arm. She'd spent the week preparing. The park had 3 main paths, and she knew exactly which one they'd try to corner her on: the east trail that curved behind the old pavilion, out of sight from the main road. It's where she would have set up an ambush if she was hunting humans instead of trying to avoid them. But Dot Henderson hadn't survived 2 war zones by running away from fights. Sometimes the best defense was a good offense. Hidden in the bushes near the pavilion, about 150 yards from where she expected the confrontation to happen, Dot had positioned her rifle with a clear line of sight. Not to hurt anyone, the weapon wasn't even loaded. But these boys needed to learn a lesson about picking on the wrong people. At 3:47 p.m., right on schedule, Marcus gave his crew the signal. "There she goes. Remember, quick and clean. Grab the purse and we're out." The 3 young men moved through the park like wolves closing in on what they thought was helpless prey. Tony came up behind Dot while Marcus and Deshawn flanked her on both sides, cutting off any escape route. "Excuse me, ma'am," Marcus called out, his voice dripping with fake politeness. "We're gonna need you to hand over that purse." Dot stopped walking and slowly turned around to face the 3 young men. Up close, they looked even younger than she'd thought. Barely out of high school. Probably from broken homes. Making bad choices because they thought they had no other options. "Boys," she said calmly, her voice carrying just a hint of her old drill sergeant authority. "I think you might want to reconsider what you're about to do." Tony laughed and pulled out a switchblade, the metal clicking as it locked into place. "Lady, you got about 5 seconds to hand over that purse before this gets ugly." "You know," Dot said, apparently unimpressed by the knife, "back in my army days we had a saying, 'The enemy gets a vote.' Means no matter how well you think you've planned something, the other guy might have plans of his own." Marcus was getting impatient. "What are you talking about, old lady? Just give us the money and nobody gets hurt." Dot's expression hardened, and suddenly the 3 young men were looking at someone very different from the frail grandmother they'd been following. The change was subtle but unmistakable: the way she stood, the confidence in her eyes, the complete absence of fear. "Here's what's going to happen," Dot said, her voice calm as winter morning. "You're going to apologize for threatening me, you're going to walk away, and you're going to find something better to do with your lives, because if you don't, you're about to learn why this old lady isn't nearly as helpless as you think." Deshawn was the first to sense that something was wrong. Maybe it was the way Dot carried herself, or the complete lack of panic in her voice,
but every instinct he had was suddenly screaming danger. "Marcus, man, maybe we should just—" "Shut up," Marcus snapped, pulling out his own knife. "Lady, I don't know what kind of game you think you're playing, but you're about to find out we don't mess around." Dot sighed like a disappointed teacher dealing with particularly slow students. "You boys ever hear of a sniper?" "What?" Tony said, confused by the sudden change of subject. "A sniper," Dot repeated patiently, "is someone who can put a bullet exactly where they want it from a very long distance. The military trains them to be invisible, patient, and absolutely deadly accurate." Marcus was losing his patience. "Lady, what does that have to—" The crack of the rifle echoed across the park like thunder. All three young men hit the ground instinctively, their street-smart brains recognizing the sound of gunfire even if they couldn't immediately process where it had come from. When they looked up, there was a fresh bullet hole in the tree directly behind Marcus, exactly 2 inches to the left of where his head had been. "That," Dot said conversationally, "was my way of introducing myself. Dorothy Henderson, Army sniper, retired." The three young men scrambled to their feet, suddenly very aware that they were standing in the open with someone's crosshairs on them. Their knives seemed pathetically inadequate against an enemy they couldn't see, couldn't reach, and couldn't fight. "You crazy old bat!" Tony shouted, his voice cracking with fear. "You trying to kill us?" "If I wanted you dead, son, you'd be dead," Dot replied matter-of-factly. "That was just a hello. My spotter is positioned with a clear view of all three of you, and trust me, at this range, missing isn't really an option." Marcus was frantically scanning the tree line, trying to spot the shooter. "This is insane! You can't just—" Another crack echoed across the park. This time the bullet struck the ground between Deshawn's feet, kicking up dirt and pebbles. The message was clear. We can hit whatever we want, whenever we want. "Now," Dot continued, as if they were discussing the weather, "I believe I made a very reasonable request. Apologize for threatening me, walk away, and find something better to do with your lives. Because the alternative is having this conversation with the police, and I'm pretty sure you boys don't want that kind of attention." Deshawn was the first to crack. "I'm sorry, Jesus lady, I'm sorry. We didn't know." "Know what?" Dot asked. "We didn't know you were whatever you are. We thought you were just a helpless old woman," Dot finished. "That's the problem with assumptions, son. They can get you killed." Marcus was still trying to salvage his reputation as the crew's leader, but his hands were shaking as he pointed his knife in Dot's general direction. "You think this scares us? We'll come back with more guys, better weapons." The third shot took the knife clean out of his hand, sending it spinning into the bushes. Marcus stared at his empty fingers in shock, a thin line of blood where the blade had nicked his palm as it was torn away. "No, you won't," Dot said simply. "Because if you come back, if you threaten me again, if you even think about retaliating, you won't get a warning shot next time. And son, after 12 years in the Army and 47 confirmed kills, I promise you that I don't miss when it counts." The number hit them like a physical blow. 47 confirmed kills. This wasn't some crazy old lady with a hunting rifle. This was a professional killer who'd been trained by the United States military. Tony was already backing away, his earlier bravado completely gone. "We're sorry, ma'am. We're really, really sorry. We'll leave you alone, we promise." "That's a start," Dot acknowledged. "But here's what's really going to happen. You three are going to walk out of this park, you're going to go home, and you're going to think real hard about what you want to do with your lives. Because right now, you're on a path that ends in prison or the morgue, and I'd hate to see young men with your whole lives ahead of you waste them on stupidity." Deshawn was nodding frantically. "Yes, ma'am, we get it. We won't bother you again." "I'm not just talking about me," Dot continued. "I'm talking about this whole robbery nonsense. You think you're tough guys, but you're not. You're scared kids playing at being criminals, and sooner or later, you're going to pick the wrong target and end up dead or behind bars for the next 20 years. Marcus finally found his voice again. So what are you saying? We should just give up and get regular jobs? I'm saying there are better ways to make money than scaring old ladies in parks, Dot replied. Tony, you're what, 19, 20? You could learn a trade, join the military, get an education. Deshawn, you've got good instincts. You knew something was wrong before your friends did. That's the kind of awareness that could make you a good cop or security guard. She looked directly at Marcus. And you, Marcus? Yeah, I know your name, I know where you live, and I know you're the leader of this little group. That means you've got leadership potential. Question is, are you going to use it to help people or hurt them? The three young men exchanged glances, suddenly seeing themselves through very different eyes. They'd walked into this park thinking they were predators, only to discover they were being hunted by someone operating on a completely different level. How did you know our names? Deshawn asked quietly. Dot smiled for the first time since the confrontation began. Son, I've been watching you watch me for 3 weeks. You think I didn't do my homework? Here's what's going to happen, Dot continued, her voice taking on a more motherly tone. You boys are going to walk away from this life before it destroys you. And if you need help doing that, finding jobs, getting your GEDs, whatever it takes, you come talk to me. But if you choose to keep playing this game, if you decide to rob someone else or threaten another innocent person, then we're going to have a very different conversation. Tony was still staring at the spot where his knife had disappeared into the bushes. You really killed 47 people? 47 enemy combatants who were trying to kill American soldiers, Dot corrected. I didn't enjoy it, son, but I was good at it, and the skills don't just disappear when you come home. Marcus was finally starting to understand the magnitude of what they'd walked into. You could have killed us all and made it look like an accident. Could have, Dot agreed. Still could, if I needed to, but I'd rather help you turn your lives around than end them. The choice is yours. Deshawn stepped forward. Mrs. What did you say your name was? Henderson. Dorothy Henderson. Most folks call me Dot. Mrs. Henderson, what if we wanted to change, like really change, not just because we're scared? Dot's expression softened. Then we'd figure it out together. I've got connections at the VA, the police department, local businesses. There are people who believe in second chances, but you've got to earn them. She reached into her purse and pulled out 3 business cards. These are for a program that helps young people get their lives back on track. You call them, tell them Dot Henderson sent you, and they'll help you find work, finish school, whatever you need. The 3 young men took the cards with hands that were still shaking slightly. The adrenaline was wearing off, replaced by the sobering realization of how close they'd come to disaster. What happens now? Marcus asked. You gonna call the cops on us anyway? Dot considered this. That depends on you. If you walk away from this life, if you never threaten another innocent person, then as far as I'm concerned, this conversation never happened. But if you go back to robbing people, she didn't need to finish the threat. They all understood. Mrs. Henderson, Deshawn said quietly, why are you giving us a chance? Most people would just turn us in. Dot was quiet for a moment, thinking about young soldiers she'd known who'd made mistakes, who'd needed someone to believe in them. Because 40 years ago, I was an angry kid from a broken home who could have ended up on either side of this conversation. The Army gave me direction, purpose, a chance to serve something bigger than myself. Maybe you boys just need someone to show you there's another way. As the 3 young men walked away, Dot pulled out her cell phone and sent a quick text message. 2 minutes later, a figure emerged from the woods carrying the M24 rifle. Nice shooting, Grandma, said Staff Sergeant Jennifer Morrison, Dot's neighbor and a current Army sniper. Though I still think you're crazy for not just calling the cops, Dot chuckled. Those boys needed to learn a lesson, not get arrested. Besides, where's the fun in calling backup when you can handle things yourself? 3 weeks later, Dot was surprised to find Deshawn waiting on her front porch when she got home from the grocery store. Mrs. Henderson, I hope it's okay that I came by. I got your address from the phone book. It's fine, son. How are you doing? Deshawn looked nervous, but determined. I called that number you gave me, the program, I mean. They got me enrolled in community college and helped me find a part-time job at the warehouse. I'm gonna get my GED first, then maybe study criminal justice. Dot smiled. That's wonderful, Deshawn. What about Marcus and Tony? Tony's working construction with his uncle. Turns out he's actually pretty good with his hands when he's not using them to hold knives. And Marcus, Deshawn paused. Marcus, enlisted. Army, like you suggested, ships out for basic training next month. Good for him. Military can be a good fit for natural leaders who just need direction. They talked for a few more minutes about Deshawn's plans, his classes, his hopes for the future. As he was leaving, he turned back. Mrs. Henderson? Thank you. For not killing us, but also for believing we could be better. 6 months later, the Millerville Police Department was scratching their heads over an unusual trend. Street crime in the downtown area had dropped by nearly 60%, but they couldn't figure out why. What they didn't know was that word had spread through the local criminal community about an old lady who was definitely not what she seemed. I'm telling you, man, one small-time dealer told another, stay away from that whole neighborhood. There's some crazy grandma with a sniper rifle who'll put you down if you mess with people around there. The story had grown in the telling, as stories do. By now, Henderson was rumored to be everything from a retired CIA assassin to a former Special Forces operator who'd single-handedly taken out an entire terrorist cell. The truth was impressive enough, but legends have a way of becoming larger than life. Didn't mind the reputation. If it kept criminals away from her neighbors, that was fine by her. She'd spent 12 years protecting people overseas. Protecting her community at home felt like a natural extension of that service. At the annual Neighborhood Watch meeting, Police Chief Robert Martinez made a point of thanking everyone for their vigilance in keeping crime down. Whatever you folks are doing, he said, keep it up. This is shaping up to be our safest year in over a decade. Just smiled and continued knitting the scarf she was making for the church fundraiser.
A year later, Marcus came home on leave from his first deployment overseas. He'd made corporal, earned his unit's respect, and discovered he had a natural talent for leadership. He stopped by to visit Mrs. Henderson before heading back to base. I wanted to thank you, he said, sitting in her living room and accepting a cup of coffee. Not just for not shooting me that day, but for showing me there was a different path. You did the work, son. I just pointed you in the right direction. My sergeant says I've got potential to make it to the Special Forces. Says I've got the right combination of intelligence and instincts. Nodded approvingly. That doesn't surprise me. You were always the leader of your group, even when you were leading in the wrong direction. Marcus laughed. Deshawn's doing good too. Made the dean's list last semester, and he's got an internship with the county sheriff's office. Says he wants to work with at-risk youth when he graduates. And Tony? Got his contractor's license, started his own business. He's actually doing pretty well for himself. They talked for another hour about his training, his deployment, his plans for the future. As he was leaving, Marcus paused at the door. Mrs. Henderson, can I ask you something? That day in the park, were you really going to shoot us if we hadn't backed down? Considered the question seriously. Son, I spent 12 years in the Army, and I learned that the best way to win a fight is to make sure it never starts. Everything I did that day was designed to end the situation without anyone getting hurt. But if you'd forced my hand, if you'd chosen violence over common sense, she shrugged. Well, I didn't survive 2 wars by being unprepared to do what needed to be done. Marcus nodded, understanding completely. Thank you for giving us the choice.
Today, Dorothy Henderson still lives in her house on Maple Street. She still volunteers at the animal shelter, still brings cookies to church bake sales, and still takes her daily walks through downtown Millerville. To most people, she's just a sweet grandmother who's lived in the neighborhood for decades. But the local criminal element knows better. They know that some targets aren't worth the risk, that some people carry secrets that can get you killed, and that you should never, ever judge someone by their appearance. Deshawn graduated from community college with honors and is now working as a deputy sheriff, specializing in youth outreach programs. He credits Mrs. Henderson with saving his life and setting him on the right path. Tony's construction business has grown into one of the most respected contractors in the county. He employs several former gang members and at-risk youth, believing that everyone deserves a chance to build something instead of tearing it down.
Marcus made it into Special Forces, just like his sergeant predicted. He's currently serving his third deployment, protecting American interests overseas and training local forces to defend their communities. He still writes to Mrs. Henderson every month. The moral of Dorothy Henderson's story isn't just about hidden skills or dangerous grandmothers. It's about the power of second chances, the importance of looking beyond the surface, and the difference one person can make when they choose to help instead of just walking away. Across America, there are thousands of Dorothy Hendersons, veterans, former law enforcement, retired professionals whose current lives don't reflect their full capabilities. There are neighbors, our co-workers, the quiet people who serve coffee or check groceries or volunteer at local charities. But they're also the ones who step up when trouble comes calling. They're the ones who know that real strength isn't about dominating others. It's about protecting those who can't protect themselves. Have you ever discovered that someone in your community had a hidden background? Have you met veterans whose service went unrecognized? Do you know people whose current job doesn't reflect their true skills and experience? Share their stories in the comments. Tell us about the quiet heroes in your neighborhood, the people whose pasts might surprise you. The ordinary folks doing extraordinary things. Subscribe to Real Stories, because every community has heroes whose backgrounds would amaze you. Every ordinary person might have an extraordinary past, and every crisis reveals who people really are when everything is on the line. Remember, never judge people by their appearance, their age, or their current circumstances. Judge them by their character, their actions, and what they do when others need help. Because sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one nobody suspects, and sometimes the person who looks most vulnerable is actually the one keeping everyone else safe. Thank you for watching. We'll see you in the next story. Until then, remember that heroes come in all shapes and sizes, and they're all around us. We just have to look closely enough to see them.